Welcome to episode 21 of the Monday Night Review. I've had a bit of a week here. My laptop died a death. For once I was really organised and I wrote this week's episode kind of smugly early, and then my computer completely died with it on there. So I've had to redo it, but I'm taking this as a sign. So the story we're going to talk about today is a big deal for me and my sister growing up. Last week, a listener messaged me about it, and seemed like fate as 24 hours later, my old computer died with this week's episode on it. It will be retrieved, I'm told, at some point. So it didn't seem sensible to spend time rewriting it. So I thought Debbie messaging me and talking to me about this was a sign from the universe. So I know that, Debbie, you suspect that spirits are cross with me and killed my computer, but I'm just taking it as the universe making sure I had a great topic for this week's episode. This week we're going to be talking about Ichabod Crane and the legend of Sleepy Hollow. So Ichabod Crane's a fictional character from Washington Irving's story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. To summarise, Crane is a lanky schoolmaster who believes really deeply in the supernatural and is very superstitious. And this includes the legend of the Headless Horseman supposedly haunting the town of Sleepy Hollow where he lives. He falls in love with a local woman who a local man, Brom Bones, also has eyes for. And one night when going home from a party at this lady's family home, Ichabod is chased by a headless horseman and is never seen again. You may have seen the 1999 Tim Burton movie Sleepy Hollow, which, though it's very loosely based on the original work, there's lots of differences. It's still a great scary romp, which I really love. I remember when it came out, I was too scared to go and see it in the cinema because I hate horror movies, but actually it's really good. And those of you who haven't seen the Disney version, you really must. My sister and I absolutely adored it growing up. I think it's one of the first things that really frightened me, in that lovely way of being like scared and intrigued. But is there any truth in this story? Well, there's no smoke without fire. So Ichabod Crane, there is the character. He's linked to a few people. Irving apparently based the character on a school teacher called Jessie Merwin, whom he met and then remained pen pals with for 30 years. Merwin was a school teacher. He was the inspiration for Crane, but he was happily married and didn't disappear chased by a headless horseman. It's possible that Irving got the unusual name from Ichabod Bennett Crane, a colonel in the US Army, whom Irving had met in 1841. Sleepy Hollow was originally called North Tarrytown, but was renamed Sleepy Hollow in the 90s. The town has really taken the Headless Horseman story and run with it. Their local athletics team even has the horseman as their logo, and a Headless Horseman rides out on their homecoming. But stories of hauntings here go back as far as the mid-1600s, through the Revolutionary time to the late 1700s. So the legend of Sleepy Hollow wasn't the first haunted story based here. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was itself published in 1819 in a collection of 34 short stories by Washington Irving. It's one of the first examples of American fiction with enduring popularity that's still used in Halloween depictions to this day. One of the things that's so captivating about the story is Sleepy Hollow itself. It makes me think, has anyone seen that video of someone's made the trailer of The Shining into a rom-com and they've put Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel as the music, and it's really weird watching it in the style of a rom-com. And I feel like Sleepy Hollow is a name that could go either way. It's either going to be a place where baby animals go for a nap in a Disney original, or it's going to be the place where there's a headless horseman. It's an area of the Dutch settlement of Tarrytown in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And during the time of the American Revolution, it was a sort of neutral zone with British troops, German mercenaries, and patriot militiamen, all sort of not holding ground. I think it was quite a scary place to be. You couldn't trust anyone. You didn't know whose side anyone was on. It was quite a dangerous place to be. Irving lived in Tarrytown and is buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery along with Elizabeth Arden, Andrew Carnegie, William Rockefeller. That's to name just but a few. It's quite the place to be when you're dead, turns out. So there's loads of ghost stories associated with the area, but was there ever the legend of a headless horseman? Well, no. It's believed that Irving got the idea whilst travelling around Europe. He wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow whilst in glamorous Birmingham. I did a course in Birmingham, and I now just picture him desperately trying to write his story in the lovely Bromsgrove Premier Inn where I stayed. A local historian believes that Irving will have got the idea from a Hessian horseman from a local story. The ghostly Hessian soldier caused terror among the locals. In legends of headless horsemen, they're kind of divided into two camps. Those who are headless but carrying their head, and those who are kind of looking for a replacement. In the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the headless horseman is a Hessian soldier. He's killed during the Battle of White Plains in 1776, which did take place just 10 miles away from the town of Sleepy Hollow. He was decapitated by a cannonball, and whilst his comrades quickly carried his body away to be buried, the shattered remnants of his head remained on the battlefield. So he rises from his grave using a flaming jack-o'-lantern, or a pumpkin to us Brits, as a sort of temporary replacement, which seems gloriously impractical to me, but then I struggle to think of an alternative. So I guess a pumpkin would do as well as anything. Hessians were greatly feared among the Americans during the Revolutionary War. They were German soldiers who were sent by the thousands to America to reinforce the British troops. They were foreign-speaking mercenaries. They were viewed as bloodthirsty killers, even cannibals, and easily vilified. They were renowned as fearsome fighters, and there were stories that they just took no mercy on any retreating American troops. Especially noted is the Battle of Long Island, where they nailed American riflemen to trees with their bayonets. However, some of these Hessian soldiers were probably misunderstood. Many of them had been pressed into service and were forced to fight for their princes. And many Hessians even preferred life in America, and thousands decided to desert and settle in America at the end of the war rather than return to Germany. Irving writes that while the body of the Hessian lies buried in the churchyard, the ghost rides forth to see the scene of the battle in a nightly quest for his head, which sort of makes sense. So there was a novel by Mayne Reid published in 1865 called The Headless Horseman, and it's apparently based on the author's adventures around the US. He used the true story of El Muerto, the story of a Mexican gang leader who was decapitated and then tied to his horse, and his head was tied to the pommel of the saddle, the front part of the saddle, and then his horse was set off as a sort of warning to other gang members about what would happen. In Ireland, the Dullahan is a headless demonic fairy carrying his head under his arm and using a human spine as a whip, which is lovely. In Scotland, the Headless Horseman is a man named Ewan who was decapitated in a clan battle on the Isle of Man. And stories have it that his horse is headless as well. So Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow are in the Hudson Valley, which is itself no stranger to hauntings and unusual goings-on. One of the stories you hear about is Major Andre, a British soldier and spy, dressed in plain clothes on his way to deliver plans to the British. He got confused. He thought he was talking to friends when in fact he was talking to patriots and was caught. And famously, they found documents rolled up in his boots. So if you see any pictures of him, it's often of him with his boots off. And he was tried and hanged from a tree near Tarrytown. The tree's later struck and split by lightning, and it's not there anymore, but it's a big deal in the area. And weirdly, his execution was a very sort of emotional event attended by over 1,000 people, with General Lafayette and other members of the US military openly weeping, apparently. He was an incredibly charming man and fair. And though his request to be executed by firing squad was turned down, he went with incredible dignity and tied his own handkerchief around his eyes and put his own noose around his neck. The tree is now called André's tree, and a grey form is seen in the area of his demise, and some have even heard the thunder of hoofbeats and the word halt coming seemingly from nowhere. This is believed to be the tormented spirit of Major André. The tree is no longer there, but there's a monument to him which you can go and see. And in the legend of Sleepy Hollow, as Ichabod Crane rides his horse Gunpowder past the tree towards Horseman's Bridge, suddenly he heard a groan, his teeth chattered and his knees smote against the saddle. Was it really just the rubbing of one huge bough upon another, or was it the ghost of John André? It could be that Ichabod Crane's belief in the supernatural and superstitions were based on a typical Tarrytowner, as there have been tales and rumours of spooky goings-on since the 16th century. Before the Horseman became the most famous spook of the area, Huldah the Witch was the talk of the town. First seen in 1770, Irving describes her as a high German doctor. She's actually basket weaving, which the Dutch believe meant she was a witch. Obviously we could go on a whole separate episode about witches actually being herbalists, homeopaths, and those using a natural approach to healthcare. You get dubbed as a witch. So because she gets denounced by the church, she's sort of socially spurned, but she's the best doctor in town. She heals the sick using herbs. She would leave herbs on their doorstep if she heard that they were ill, and the townspeople would leave her presents on her doorstep as payment and thanks. So though she's excluded socially, thanks to the church, she traded with the local Native Americans, and she died in battle fighting the bloody British, and her body was found in what is now known as Rockefeller Preserve. When her house was sort of gone through and searched after her death, her will was found, leaving everything to the widows of the patriots who had died during the war. So I feel like she sounds like a complete badass that, again, completely misunderstood. Though it sounds like the villagers did appreciate her care. So there are ghosts of Spook Rock. Spook Rock. So one of them's a woman in white, and she is heard by Ichabod Crane on his way home from the Van Tassels in Irving's story. She's said to shriek on nights before a storm, and that's supposedly the sound of her looking for somewhere to shelter, because she died in a snowstorm when she had nowhere to go. There's also 2 Native American girls who haunt the area, one who jumped to her death to avoid the sexual advances of a raider, and then there's Stargirl, who's another Native American ghost, and she met a local hunter at Spook Rock. They became lovers, and she had his baby. She then apparently disappears, and her son, who's now a toddler, refuses to eat, and he starves to death, and his devastated father buries him by the river, and then he himself disappears. 3 years later, Stargirl returns and looks for her husband and son, and unable to find them, it sort of seems to just patrol the banks of the river, and her ghost is seen on the banks of the river wailing and looking for her family. But where did she go for 3 years? So, as with everywhere, there's also some houses whom the residents believe to be haunted. I mean, I can imagine if you're moving into somewhere as steeped in sort of hauntings and mythology as this, you might feel a bit spooked by your house. Most seem to have nothing relevant or even that sinister in their history, but one family went to the local historical society complaining that they repeatedly heard the sound of someone tripping down the stairs and saw water pooling at the top of the stairs. And when research was done into the house's history, it revealed that 80 years before, the owner of the house had slipped in a pool of water at the top of the stairs, fallen down and died. There's also the bronze lady who's left her mark on the history of the town. She's a sculpture that sits between two stately pines in the north central section of the fabled graveyard. She supposedly weeps audibly and visibly. Anyone brave enough to sit on her lap was rumoured to be protected for life, but most children, as this takes place at night, as you can imagine, most children don't dare to go and sit on her knee. There's a forlorn sadness in the slumped shoulders and the mouth and eyes. Her face is streaked, and it's the work of Andrew O'Connor Jr., who was a noted sculptor of his day, and he was commissioned by General Thomas's widow shortly after his death on January the 14th, 1903. The statue's called Grief, and is intended as a memorial figure to be placed in front of the general's tomb, but I don't think she's in front of the general's tomb, but she's very beautiful. So I've only touched on a few of the ghostly happenings that I'm sure take place in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. I'm desperate to visit. My early days of being obsessed with this story, but also Murder, She Wrote, which takes place in Maine, and all up that side of America, I'm just obsessed with, especially at this time of year when it's Halloweeny. I've been to Washington in October, and it made me realise just how seriously they take Halloween there. So it's a really beautiful place to go. And thanks to Debbie, I've found some Instagram accounts that I've been looking at. And it's just lovely. If you're not feeling in the autumnal mood, go and check them out. There's a few Tarrytown Instagram accounts. It's just really amazing at this time of year. So, and I'll put some pictures up on our Instagram and Facebook, which are at The Monday Night Review. And you can always email us your stories or your true experiences or anything like that to themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. Remember, that's spelled REVUE. And thank you so much for listening, and I'm so hoping that by next week I've got my other story back off my computer, because that means that's happened. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.